Hi, everyone. Welcome. As you're trickling in, we're going to wait a few minutes to let a few more people join, and then we'll get started. But thank you for being here. Hi, everybody. Again, as folks are trickling in, we're going to give ourselves another minute maybe before we get started. So thanks for being here. All right, well, let's get started. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us here tonight. My name is Becky Tilson. I'm the project manager for the City Organization Project. I'm here tonight with our Chief Administrative Officer, Mike Jordan, and other members of the Charter Transition team. So welcome to our team and welcome to you all for joining us here tonight. As you likely know, in November of 2022, Portlanders chose a new form of government with the passage of Measure 26228. That measure amended the Portland City Charter in a lot of ways, including restructuring how City Council is elected, how it operates, and what duties it will perform. The new form of government will launch on January 1st of 2025, and there is a lot to do that the city needs to do in order to implement a smooth transition between now and then. We are here tonight to talk about one piece of that larger project, which is the restructuring of the city's 26 bureaus and offices under the management of a professional city administrator rather than under the management of 5 council offices as they are now. So tonight we're going to talk about the city organization project, and then we're going to review the draft organizational chart recommendation that was shared out on September 12th. And then we'll talk about how community can provide feedback before City Council makes their final decision in October. And then we'll leave lots of time for questions and comments from you all. We will be in this space until 7 and after 7 as well. If the questions are continuing to roll through, we'll work through as many of them as we can. So I'm going to pass it to Nicole to review some logistics about tonight's meeting, and then we'll get into the presentation. And again, thank you all for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Nicole. I use she, her pronouns. And I was just going to let you know about some of the functionality that we have here at Zoom. So the meeting is recorded and we posted on the transition website. We are also currently live streaming on YouTube, which is a new thing that we're trying out. For today's meeting, we also have closed captioning. We hopefully will have our American Sign Language interpreters joining us this evening, and Spanish interpretation is available if you click on the globe at the bottom of your screen. You will also find closed captioning with the CC icon also at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us via phone, you may have to click on the 3 dots at the bottom of your screen to pull up all of the options that we have here available on Zoom, where you can find the closed captioning. For today's meeting, we also have a question and answer section. You can view all of the questions that have been asked. You can upvote questions that you'd also like to hear during our question and answer discussion. We're also going to be trying to answer some questions as we go along through the presentation. And if for some reason we can't get to all of our questions in the time tonight, we'll be continuing to post some of those Q&As documents on the transition website for folks to take a look. With that, I think we'll move on to I'll pass it back to Becky for the rest of the presentation this evening.
Thanks, Nicole. And I see there's some new folks in the room, so I'll introduce myself again. Becky Tilson, she, her pronouns. I'm the project manager for the City Organization Project, which is the subject of tonight's webinar. So I really appreciate everybody joining us. Like I said before, I'm going to run through a presentation, pass it to CIO Mike Jordan, who's going to talk about our organizational recommendation, the draft that we shared out a couple of weeks ago, and then we'll open the floor for some questions from the group here today. So I want to start with an overview. If you go to the next slide, please, I want to start with an overview of why we're working on an updated structure for the city organization in the context of the larger charter transition project process. So the new form of government will be a mayor council form with a city administrator. Structurally and operationally, it's going to be very different than what we have today. City councilors, who will be elected from 4 different districts, will no longer directly oversee city bureaus. Instead, the Legislative Council will work together on setting policies to achieve desired community outcomes. The mayor, elected citywide, will no longer serve on council. Instead, they'll lead the executive branch and have administrative authority. The future mayor is also going to appoint, and then council will confirm a professional city administrator. And that city administrator is going to be the person in charge of managing all 26 city bureaus and offices in service areas, as we'll explore on future slides. So this project was formed to really create a reporting structure for the city organization that is rational, that has reasonable spans of control, and reports to one city administrator. And we looked at kind of high level in the organization. So budget, program, offer, level, and higher. We'll talk about that a little bit in the next slide. Next slide, please. So we talked about why we're doing this. So why are we doing this now? The timing of our budget process, the city budget process, requires that we make these structural changes by October of this year, which is next month, in time for the development and adoption of the fiscal year 24-25 budget, which includes the transition to the new form of government in January 25. And the new organizational structure needs to be up and running before January 25. So this leaves time, this decision timeline that we're on leaves time for the massive technical implementation that needs to happen, as well as gives us space to do thoughtful change management and support our employees through the change before a brand new slate of leaders take over in 2025. Also, as you can see in kind of this sample graphic, this is not our organizational chart, this is a sample. If nothing changes, the city administrator would have kind of way too many direct reports for them to effectively lead, and we run the risk of a chaotic transition that could be disruptive to our internal operations and to our delivery of services to community. So we felt like we needed to come up with that rational, reasonable reporting structure. And having that reporting structure that makes sense, that is reasonably managed by that kind of one city administrator, also really sets the stage for larger and longer term conversations about system improvements, process improvements that we as a city need to make. In this new form of government, we're going to be operating kind of more as one unified city under a collective vision, which is a really exciting opportunity for us to rethink and reshape how we work together. But having that structural foundation in place before that work begins is going to be really vital for us. You'll see in the coming slides, and if you've had a chance to review the draft proposal prior to this meeting, that one of the key features of our proposed organizational structure is organizing bureaus in service areas under the leadership of a deputy city administrator, who in turn reports to the city administrator. So not only is 26 kind of too many offices and bureaus for one person to reasonably manage, but there are a couple of additional benefits to this sort of service area deputy city administrator model. A couple of opportunities for increased coordination and collaboration within service areas, which, as you'll see, are sort of like bureaus that are being clustered together. And then also there's the creation of this citywide leadership team that Mike will talk about in his slides, that's really charged with looking across the organization for citywide solutions to some of our most challenging issues that simply can't be solved by one bureau or one program alone. This is a model that we saw across other cities when we were doing research into other cities as well, with either deputy or assistant city administrators leading service areas or clusters of bureaus really working towards a shared purpose. So before I pass it to Mike, I wanted to make a couple notes about the draft organizational charts that you'll see. The version that we're going to talk about tonight is the same as the one that we shared out on September 12th, and it is a draft, and it will most certainly evolve into the version that we share with council for their consideration and vote on October 19th, based on feedback that we received from community, from employees, and from council members. And like I said, the scope of the project was really high level. So the changes that you'll see reflected on the draft org chart compared to what we have now are also high level, and they mostly involve the bureau, but sometimes down to the program level. It's also worth noting that if you don't see a specific program called out on the org chart, that just means that it's remaining in its current bureau configuration and not changing. And then lastly, really, this is the beginning of the conversation, and we hope that the conversation continues. We really hope that this new structure will tee up conversations about how we can better serve communities, how we can better work together, how we can continue to innovate and evolve, and a lot more. Like I was talking about, all these other additional process improvements that will come later. This feels like a really exciting inflection point for the city, and I'm really pleased to be involved in this work and grateful to you all for your engagement. So Mike, I'm going to pass it to you, then we'll talk about how to submit comments and we'll shift over to Q&A.
Thanks, Becky, and thank all of you for taking time to be with us tonight. We really appreciate it. So my role here is to just walk through a couple of slides which will represent, first of all, the broader organization on this first slide, and then the second slide will focus more on the executive office. So as you can see, and I'll focus most of my comments on this slide to the colored boxes. You can see the city administrator in the kind of center left of the slide. And then as Becky mentioned, these 5 service areas headed up by a deputy city administrator. And I'll note a few things in here that are worth drawing out, because they are, this is a discussion draft and they may be things that you'd like to comment on or ask questions about. You can see that the top box says budget and finance, and the third box is city operations. Many of the component parts of both of those boxes were formerly, or I guess currently, I should say, in the Office of Management and Finance at the city, or OMF. What we've done in this draft is we've separated in the top box, the green box, we've separated all of the financial parts of the city, both offices and bureaus, and collected them under one deputy city administrator. And then all of the operational internal service pieces are in that city operations group in the center of all the boxes there. There are some things that are a little different than have been in the past. So for instance, the fire and police disability and retirement group up in the budget and finance group wasn't part of a group before. And you'll also see a business operations group. That group was actually in OMF and will do kind of the backroom business operational issues of finance and human resources issues for both the finance group and the city ops group, along with, and I'll mention this later, along with the executive office and the city council. The second box is a community and economic development group, and we've grouped together a number of bureaus currently that work on elements of either the development process, and of course, including Prosper Portland, that is the city's arm for economic development. And you can see a dotted line to the box there that says Prosper Portland Commission. It is one part of the city that by charter actually reports to a separate commission. They actually review and recommend the ultimate budget for Prosper Portland to the city council for their ultimate adoption. But on a day-to-day basis, Prosper reports to their commission. Another thing that you'll note is a double asterisk note in that community and economic development group called permitting. And that's to reflect instructions that we got through a resolution about a month ago from City Council asking us to unify all of the different elements of permitting that are currently embedded in 7 different bureaus and create a unified permitting structure for the city. That is a pretty new charge for us. And so we'll be working over the course of the rest of this fiscal year on a permitting group to try and get that implemented by July 1st of next year. So that's under construction. Back to the city operations piece, I'll note that the asset management line there that has an asterisk by it, it's a new thing for us. Not necessarily that we do asset management, because we do it all over the city in different bureaus that have lots of different physical assets. But we have noted in the last few years working with city council that we really need a small group of people to set the standard of practice for asset management across the city, help with training, and create that community of practice so we are all doing asset management roughly the same way, and then help advocate with the administrator and the mayor and ultimately the council regarding having the right resources in place across the city to actually do asset management as a discipline in a reasonable way across all of our asset classes. The fourth box down there that says community safety, we've pulled together all of the kind of traditional community safety and public safety bureaus in the city now, and you can see those: emergency communications, emergency management, fire, and police. But we've also included a group that has been working for a couple of years now to raise the kind of, again, the backroom services for all four of those bureaus and consolidate them in a business operations group. And you can see that listed as community safety business operations. So those are all within community and safety and under one city administrator. When we go to the executive slide, I will talk a little bit about the appointment of the chief of police, and yet the Portland Police Bureau reporting to this deputy city administrator and then up to the city administrator. It's a little bit confusing, and I just want to say a couple things, and I'll do that on the next slide. And then Public Works at the bottom has some of the things that you'd absolutely expect in it: environmental services that run the wastewater and stormwater systems for the city, transportation, of course, the Portland Water Bureau, but also a couple of things that don't necessarily come to mind for Public Works: Parks and Recreation, a couple of the groups that talked about these different service areas with the commissioners and the directors together over the spring and summer this year, recommended or at least raised the idea that Parks and Recreation could be considered an infrastructure bureau, in the sense that they manage large amounts of land and many, many facilities. And so maybe they look a little more like the other infrastructure bureaus. And then arts is the real wild card here. But there was also a recommendation that Parks and Recreation and arts stay together. And so that's what got into this draft. I will tell you, there are lots of comments about this particular part, along with others. And so we will be considering all of those comments as we look toward the final draft that will go to council for their consideration in October. Let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what I call the executive office. You see that the mayor and city administrator are there, kind of in the middle left of the page. And I'll talk about some of the sections that are accountable to them. As Becky mentioned, the mayor will appoint and the city council will confirm a city administrator, to be the kind of the single point of accountability, if you will, for the management and operations of city government. But you will also see below the mayor that the mayor appoints a city attorney, also with council confirmation, and appoints the chief of police, also with council confirmation. And the mayor has the authority also to remove those folks from those positions if he or she so chooses. So the confusing part about the chief of police: The charter is clear that the Charter Commission proposed and voters voted for the mayor having authority over the appointment and removal of the chief of police. The Charter Commission was also clear that they wanted all of the programs, the operations of city government, to report up through and to a city administrator. So that creates a little bit of a dilemma, but it is not unheard of. I once managed a city for about 10 years where I was the city administrator that had oversight over city government, but the city council retained their authority to hire and fire the chief of police, along with a couple of other officers, a city treasurer and a city recorder. But it was clear there that the council also held me accountable in that venue for the day-to-day operations of all of city government, including the police department in that venue. Again, not unheard of in city government, but it does create a little bit of maybe confusion for folks about who's reporting to whom. So let's talk a little bit about the box below the mayor there, below the chief of staff, Portland Solutions. There's been quite a bit of discussion about this, to be expected. It's a brand new idea, and you can see the double asterisks there on the chart. That means that this is not only a new notion, but it's one that is still under discussion, still under construction, I like to say, of what we're actually trying to accomplish and how best would we organize to do that. So you can see in that box that currently there are a list of programs that have been created in the last few years in response to emergency declarations by the mayor in regards primarily to homelessness and the effects of that and other livability issues in the city, like graffiti and trash. And so it was thought as we were putting the discussion draft together that that since those have been run primarily out of the mayor's office for the last 3 years or so, that it would be appropriate for them to be run still out of the mayor's office, at least while we're still under the current form of government. And then you'll see neighborhoods and districts listed there. And that really goes to kind of the other, what I would say the other major driver for the formation of Portland Solutions. The thinking was that we are going to have formally now 4 districts in our city when this all goes into effect in 2025. And we're confident that there will be quite a growing need to be responsive to sometimes unique issues within districts that are geographically based. And we were thinking about how could the city be responsive to 4 different districts with somewhat unique issues in them, and those coming to the city in real time. How could we be responsive and yet not have what would be at least 20, what we currently call bureaus, taking calls in real time from 4 different districts, and then trying to figure out how to be responsive to those calls, and perhaps not having, if we didn't have some coordinating office to really try to make sure that we weren't stumbling over ourselves, if you will, in trying to be responsive to 4 different districts. And those folks in those bureaus still have, to a very great degree, citywide responsibilities to run systems that need to be responsive across the entire city. So we thought that we needed a new thing to construct that could both do outreach into districts and be responsive to some of the unique things that we know are going to come from districts as they get formed, as they mature, and as we hear more from them. And they will also have 3 elected officials that represent these different districts. So that was a lot of the thinking behind this. Again, still under construction, taking comment on it. And one of the comments that we received that we certainly are going to be paying attention to, and that's from the city attorney, who has noted for us that the new charter amendments envision that all of the programmatic type groups that run programs and all those employees need to be reportable up into the city administrator. And so we will likely, for one thing, move this entire thing over under the assistant city administrator reporting into the city administrator. Again, the what that's in and kind of the internal structure and mechanisms and mission of Portland Solutions is still under construction, still under discussion. So let's move over to the other things that now report to the city administrator, or at least that we have envisioned them reporting. One is an equity officer. We believe that the city's interests in equity and anti-racism are still really important things for us. We think there is work to do on how the city is responding to those priorities. But so we believe that there needed to be someone accountable in the organization directly to the leadership, the executives that was overseeing our approach to equity and really working with the city administrator, obviously, but also the deputies and the bureaus about how do we really want to deploy our human resource? What are the priorities? How can we be more perhaps unified and coordinated in our response to equity? And so that's why that officer is up there in the executive office. And that's a little bit of kind of what we expect their oversight to be. And then you see the assistant city administrator that has two different groups reporting to them, both new. I would submit that both should have probably double asterisks now that we've thought about the discussion draft for a couple of weeks, because both those things are still under discussion and under construction. The council operations one is kind of self-explanatory. We will have a new 12-member council. They will need to have operational support, that is HR and purchasing and financial and budget support to them. We expect that they will likely form committees. Those committees will need staffing support. Secondly, you see legislative process in that box. We needed to have kind of a I don't want to say a broker, but a person or a group that oversees how legislation comes from the bureaucratic executive side of the organization and gets to the legislative side of the organization. So when we as an executive group need to propose legislation to the new council, how does it get there? What does it need to be prepared to get to council? Does it go through committees first and then to council, or directly to council? And so somebody to coordinate that legislative process. And then lastly, it's not listed in the box, but something that is certainly under a lot of discussion, and that is that we will have 12 elected city councilors in the new form of government, and we have roughly 7,000 employees in the executive branch. And imagine the communications matrix with 12 and 7,000 and how many different permutations there might be to those communications. And whether that's just a simple request for some information, whether it is a particular question about a particular district, whether it is just how do we have information flow back and forth in a coordinated way so that all of the council is kind of on the same page about all the things that we're working on in the executive branch. So we're thinking that there needs to be kind of a coordinating role, setting communication protocols so that we can have something short of maybe mass chaos when we put all of this back into place. And then I'll jump to the community relations group. You can see there that there are a lot of things in that group that were handled by the former civic and community life. So many of those programs reside here. We've also heard feedback that those programs really should be coordinated well with neighborhoods and districts and across the city. And so I think it will be a good thing for both of these groups to be reporting into the assistant city administrator and then ultimately the city administrator. And I would say that this is also still a little bit under construction. A couple of things that I want to note: a communications officer and an engagement officer. We know currently that we do both communications and public engagement, community engagement in many bureaus across the city now. We also know that our approach to those things is very, very uneven. And so we're looking for these two offices to be the overseer of these, what I would call disciplines in the city, and to try and work with both the city administrator and the deputies to have a conversation about how do we, what are the standards for communication and engagement that we should be employing across the entire city? How do we distribute our human resource to be able to execute on what we expect from both communications and engagement? And how do we make sure that we're doing it in an appropriate way across the entire city, the citywide kind of approach? The last thing I'm going to say before I open it up or give it back to Becky, I should say, and that is I get a lot of questions about this level of management, and I'm sure there will be some tonight, particularly the deputy city administrators. And aside from what Becky noted regarding spans of control and being able to actually manage an appropriate span, that if we put all the bureaus directly under the city administrator, it would be really difficult. Aside from that, I'm excited about the fact that there will be in the city for the first time kind of an executive management team made up of the city administrator and the deputies, along with the equity officer and the assistant city administrator, that their charge will be really to look horizontally across the entire city. We currently have no one in the city with that role, and including the elected officials. Collectively, they account for the whole city, but with the way we're structured today, there is no one group or group that are held accountable for how we do our business across the entire enterprise. And I'm pretty excited about a future that has much more transparent accountability and has a group of people that are really thinking about the city as an entire enterprise and not just a collection of bureaus. So I'm going to stop there. I know there will be questions, and we can talk more about what you'd like to talk about. So Becky, back to you.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for running through that. If you go to the next slide, please, I'm gonna just share how you can share your feedback, and then we're gonna open up the floor to the questions. And I would, if you haven't been able to follow along, if you click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, there's a bunch of questions that are coming in from fellow meeting attendees, some of which we've been answering sort of typing away. So go ahead and take a look at those. If you see a question that you would like to upvote, please click the thumbs up button and it'll upvote it. And we'll be sure to touch on the questions that are most important to folks here. Also, if you're interested in providing feedback, there's a couple different ways to do that. There's an anonymous feedback form on the transition website, which is right there, portland.gov/transition/comment. Or you can send an email to transition@portlandoregon.gov. The comment period was going to close on Saturday. We received some feedback that didn't feel like enough time. So we were able to extend it just a couple more days, which hopefully gives a few more people the opportunity to weigh in. So the comment period is now extended until October 5th, which is next Thursday, so a little over a week from today. If you get us comments by October 5th, we'll be able to consider them as part of the updated recommendation that we send to council. Comments are still welcome after October 5th. Anything that we receive after October 5th, we will forward directly to council, and they will take it under consideration when they have their hearing on our recommendation on October 19th. Of course, everybody is also welcome to sign up to testify before City Council at that hearing, at that public hearing. So huge thanks to everybody for coming, to Mike for walking through all of those charts there. And there's been a lot of great questions in the chat. So I'm going to pass it to Nicole to kind of highlight a couple of things for Mike and I to ruminate on out loud.
Thank you, Becky. Again, my name is Nicole. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the staff on the transition team here. Thank you to everyone who has already submitted a question in the question and answer box. If you'd like to submit a question, you go to the bottom of your screen. There should be a Q&A box. That is where you can open the questions that are currently open and like or upvote questions that are already there. You can also view the questions that have already been answered this evening. And thank you so much to everyone who's already submitted a question. Okay, so we have a couple of questions that we've already marked that we'd like to answer live. And so these questions vary. So thank you so much for these questions this evening. I think this one is for Mike. Why is the independent police review part of city operations as opposed to community safety? Would the proposed Community Board for Police Accountability or Office of Community-Based Police Accountability also follow suit and be a part of city operations as opposed to community safety? Can you talk about that a bit more?
Sure, I can try. Currently, the IPR currently reports into the Office of Management and Finance. We also know that there's a change coming in the future of those committees, and that one is supposed to sunset and the others will continue. And those are in the community, in community safety business operations. At least they are supported in that area right now. We have not proposed a change to that. And so the coordination of the transition about which ones sunset and which ones continue are still kind of in flux, I can tell you that. But I guess I would say the future of those committees is currently envisioned to stay with the Community Safety Business Operations group, to be supported there.
Thank you. And if for some reason we didn't get to the exact part of your question, you can always ask the question in a different way in the Q&A box. So encouraging folks to do that if we didn't quite hit it at where folks wanted us to go. Going to the next question that we marked as answered live. Who were the groups that talked with commissioners? The GTAC, or Government Transition Advisory Committee, was not involved. So who was? Around your comment around parks being in public works in particular.
Sure. I think Becky mentioned this briefly, but what we have been doing over the course of the spring and summer this year was we convened 5 different groups with the commissioners' offices and the sets of bureaus that are in the service areas under those commissioners. We had a facilitated conversation to do programmatic assessment at the front end of the programs that are in those different service areas. They were really looking at, is it appropriate for all these programs to be in these service areas? Should they be moved somewhere else? Are they appropriate with this group? And so that was the first phase. There was a second phase that started to consider what should the future organizational structure look like, and did we have the right groups? Should there be different groups? And so that was a part of phase 2. There were reports done for each phase for each of the groups. And so when we got those reports after phase 2, we used those to put together some alternatives that were discussed at the leadership level, the executive leadership, and with the commission offices. And out of a couple of those groups, those reports, there was input about parks being an infrastructure bureau because of the amounts of land and buildings that they managed. I'm not sure that will be the end when we get to the final option. We're getting a lot of input on it. And so certainly taking everybody's comments on whether that's appropriate or not. Certainly the arts in public works raises some eyebrows. So certainly looking for comments there. So I'll stop there. I know we've got lots of questions I could go on, but
I do want to chime in just briefly with, I agree obviously with everything you said, Mike. The question I'm wondering if it was, maybe I'll just take the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the other
Sure.
inputs
Sure.
that we got into the project. So Mike mentioned these programmatic assessment teams that took place in service areas that were convened by council offices and staffed by bureau leadership, sometimes deputy directors of bureaus, sometimes equity managers of bureaus, and subject matter experts in the member bureaus. We had other inputs into this process that we kind of took under advisement as we went through the process that Mike just outlined. We've done research into other jurisdictions and how they organize themselves. We had a couple of panels of experts that came in and talked to us about the deputy city administrator model, about the city administrator, about how to center equity through organizational change. And then we also had an employee survey and a manager survey that were open for several months. We ran 2 reports of that, summarized that, and shared out that information with folks. Those were really designed to explicitly support the programmatic assessments that Mike was just talking about. And then we also did a community outcomes report where we convened information that had already been connected from 4 different sources. The Portland Insight Survey, the auditors and the ombudsman's office, several other places of information that existed that had been sort of rigorously collected about desired outcomes of community of their city government. We shared out that one in our last open house that we had, I believe, at the end of July, to kind of talk through what those desired community outcomes were. So those were the sorts of inputs that we had in addition to this input, this sort of heavy input from the executive leadership team of the city and the council offices to really help inform what's working, what's not working, and how to move forward productively. So all of those things, kind of that universe of feedback, really kind of crystallized into the draft proposal that Mike shared out a couple of weeks ago. And all of that plus feedback that we're receiving between when we submitted the draft and when we have the finalized proposal to council are really going to kind of take it across the finish line. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Becky. Okay, moving on to the next question. Why aren't neighborhoods and districts also listed in the community relations for a box or cluster group that will be under supervision of the assistant city administrator? Will work on developing the community relations sort of grouping begin before 2025? And will it include input from the Portland Engagement Project?
let me start at the back of that question and work my way to the front. Absolutely, there will be more discussion about how these, what are currently just boxes and lists on a piece of paper, there will certainly be much more conversation about what's the final form of those things. And I would, I don't know the exact answer, but I would speculate that yes, the engagement project will be part of that discussion. As I mentioned before, getting more towards the front end of the question, we are currently in the final draft. Portland Solutions will certainly be under the Assistant City Administrator, just as Community Relations is in the current draft. So those will be together. What will be the exact form of both? As I said, they're both kind of under construction, and maybe I can make just a generic statement about what's coming really for the whole organization, but particularly these new things that we're attempting to construct. And that is that assuming that the council gets a final draft on the 19th and they approve it, we will immediately pivot to a deeper level of conversation regarding not only what's in those in those areas in the executive office, but also in all of these service areas. As Becky mentioned at the very beginning, this is a very high level framework for how the city would operate in the future. But there are literally scores of questions buried in these service areas and questions about how the equity officer, the communications officer, the engagement officer will engage with the organization. And to your specific question, how that Portland Solutions idea and the programs that are in community relations, how will those relate to each other and integrate? So those will all be, I would say, rather robust conversations through the rest of this fiscal year. But some of it will need to be front loaded to the degree that, as Becky mentioned, we need to budget for the organizational structure that will be in place next fiscal year that will ultimately be handed off to the new mayor and new city council.
Great. Thank you for that question and for that answer, Mike. Appreciate it. Okay, moving to the next one that we have marked as answered live. This is a question about the groupings that currently show on this organization, this sort of discussion draft that we have on our screen right now. Are the 5 service areas are they linked to the current council size? Or the 5 service areas deemed to be optimal to ensure a reasonably sized citywide leadership team of 8 people that include the city administrator, the assistant city administrator, the equity officer, and the 5 deputy city administrators? Can you talk more about the big picture groupings there?
Sure. And that's a great question. So a number of elements that were mentioned in the question. One, what's an appropriate span of control for a deputy city administrator? How much should they be overseeing? One looks at this and you can think about it in different ways. First of all, you can think about it as kind of natural subject areas. And you can think about it in terms of span of control, numbers of employees, sizes of budgets. And if you do those different kinds of things, they can take you different places. So for instance, Public Works, and if you look at the bureaus that are in Public Works, there is probably well over half the city's budget, maybe closer to 2/3 of the budget exists in those bureaus. And if you look up at budget and finance, it's a relatively small number of employees and size of budget. And yet, if you look at it, budget and finance as a subject area, it's clearly one of the more important subject areas in the entire city because it touches everything in the city all the time. And so your observation is correct. We tried to look at spans of control, sizes of budget, but we also tried to look at natural groupings of things to put in a single group. Is the number 5 magic? No. We started this whole conversation last spring last winter, when we asked the mayor to assign our current bureaus in more of natural subject matter areas. And so our current 5 commissioners oversee, I won't say exactly the same, but similar kinds of groupings, with the exception of the division of city operations and budget and finance. And so we had the conversations based on that. But going into those conversations, we let everybody know that 5 is not a magic number. It could be 6, it could be 4. I've heard people argue as many as 7 different divisions. We are cognizant of the fact that we are creating literally the 6 new executive positions in the city. That is not without a cost. And so we're kind of aware of that being a bit of a balancing factor. On the other hand, when you look at the size of the entire city budget, which is $6.5 billion, the cost of these positions are not necessarily a big cost. And then I guess I would say regarding costs also, because there may be other questions about this. When I think about all the money the city spends on all that it spends, and we spend a lot of money on a lot of things, I tend to believe that it isn't exactly the amount of money we spend, but what value do we get for that money? And I can assure you that this management structure, the transparency and accountability that it will bring to the upper management of the city over time will change the culture of this city, and I think change the way we do business and how we're accountable to the public in both the way we do it and what we actually deliver. So I think there's huge value in both transparency and coordination and a number of different things. That horizontal look that I mentioned earlier that doesn't exist today, I think that's going to bring huge value to the city over time. Sorry, I kind of veered off a bit into budget, but.
Well, there were a few questions around budget and how we were going to pay for this. So thank you for veering into that. I'm sure the group has appreciated that this evening. Wanted to make a plug. If you still have a question this evening that you would like answered live, we also are answering questions as we are answering them live. If you'd like to see the questions that have already been asked, please go to the bottom of your screen and open the Q&A box. You can submit questions there. You can also view the questions that have already been answered. You can upvote or like questions there. So continue to please, and thank you to everyone who's already asked a question. We've answered 36 questions so far this evening and happy to answer more. Wanted to make sure that folks know that we will continue to have this Q&A this evening, and just appreciation to everyone joining and asking questions. Okay, there have been a lot of questions popping up on my screen. So I'm going to take a moment here and sort through grab the next question for us this evening. Okay, I am seeing a question here that is a bit more broad, but also very specific at the same time. So thank you. We need more transparency from 311 around reporting clogged storm drains or traffic signals, requests for stop signs or crosswalks. It might be good for everyone to be able to see existing reports or status reports or what folks are talking to 311 about. A great resource also as well. So plugging our 311 team at the City of Portland that also answers questions from throughout Multnomah County. So huge appreciations to them. How can we set up a two-way process to get data back into the system from the bureaus? And how do we make it so that data is open and more transparent? Maybe not only through 311 or throughout this transition.
Wow. Great question. I guess I would, a couple of things come to mind. First of all, I totally agree with you about 311. I think it is one of our shining star programs, and we want to enhance it over time. We want it to go 24/7 at some point. We know that it plays a vital role in helping to offload the 911 system in some ways. So we're really looking to make it even more robust. I think your idea about how do we get data, not only from 311, but from all of the city in a usable form, in maybe an open data kind of format. We have a project at the city that isn't listed on this chart, but is currently a collaboration among the Smart City Group in planning and sustainability, the performance metrics group in the city budget office, and the technology services group, among others, that are looking at how can we make the data that we collect more accessible. How do we make it so that analysis can be done on the data? And obviously, how can we make it more transparent to both the public and, quite frankly, even across city government? We struggle inside city government to have access to data across bureaus, and that is a big challenge for us. So it's a great point that you're making. It is absolutely spot on that we should be doing that. And I could say this about a lot of different things, but I'll say it about data management. It has come up as a really important thing that if we're doing all of this restructuring of city government, shouldn't we think about how can we align the different parts that might manage data in a more unified way, in a more fluid way, in a more transparent way across the entire city. So know that that's a subject of intense discussion right now, even though it's not listed on the chart.
Thank you. Moving down. Okay, there's so many questions here. Thank you, and continue to put them in. Here's a question. This is a great one. Actually, they're all great. I'm sorry for judging all the questions. All of our questions this evening are wonderful. What will the process be for changing the org chart in the future, in 2024 and then 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I said before, when council adopts an organizational structure, we'll pivot immediately onto kind of what's the second tier of questions that are embedded in this chart, and how can we incorporate those into the budget process that we're getting ready for the 24-25 budget year that we will hand off to the new administration. The other thing we're doing, and this will be in the resolution that goes to council also, and through all these discussions and all the input that we've received, there are a number of business process and organizational structural questions that we know that we should continue to work on, but we won't have time and we won't be able to go to the level of detail in the first cycle of the budget to be able to implement them in the first year. So council will get a set of these issues, items that we should consider. They will tell us to continue to work on. The other thing that we should note is that about this time next year, we will begin working on the next fiscal year's budget, the one that will be the first budget that the new mayor and new council consider when they've taken office. But we will begin working on it, and we'll be well down the path of that budget process by the time they get into office. And so what I like to say is we'll have a second bite of the apple regarding those more detailed questions, those more subtle changes in organizational structure that we can't do in the first cycle. We'll have another chance to build on that momentum and address some of those things that are more detailed and more challenging to do in one budget cycle. And then let me close on that question with, I think Becky said it. We've been given a gift by the voters with this change in structure. It has prompted all of these discussions about how we do business, how we're organized, how can we be more accountable and transparent in what we're doing, which is a gift for us. But it's the beginning of the conversation, not the end. We're just kind of setting the stage so that a new mayor, new city administrator, new city council can at least inherit a basic structure that can run and be manageable, and that one person could feel comfortable being accountable for in January of 2025. As they get comfortable in their roles and they begin to interact and begin to observe how this structure operates, they're going to have lots of observations about how they think it could be better. And so these changes are going to continue on into the future, and that will be for future administrators and future administrations to take up. So think about all of this as just kind of laying the foundation for what I think will be a really exciting ongoing conversation about change into the future.
That was a really excellent segue, actually, to the next question, Mike.
Okay.
Believe it or not, beyond the goal of sort of just aligning the budget processes, can you speak to the desired outcomes and how the new organizational structure will improve city services and livability here in Portland?
Well, it's a good question. Organizational structures aren't magic. They're an essential but not sufficient part of change. There are other parts that are really important too that you can't do by just implementing a new organizational structure. Hopefully, if you do it well, it begins to change behavior, which begins ultimately to change corporate culture. And I will tell you, there are a number of characteristics in the city, the way we operate today, that are cultural characteristics born out of an organizational structure that's been in place for over 100 years. And it isn't the organizational structure that is the culprit. It is the culture that emanates from that structure and how people behave within the structure that gets you kind of undesirable outcomes. Let's put it that way. So today, it is very difficult looking from the outside in to know who is ultimately accountable for the city's performance on almost anything, actually. I've been asked by the media, Mike, there are 5 deputies there. We have 5 commissioners now. What's the difference? Well, first of all, the city administrator will hire those 5, assuming it ends up being 5, will hire those people based on their experience, their training, their abilities to manage in crisis, their abilities and experience in big public organizations, their subject matter expertise within the service area that they're being hired for. Currently, when we elect people into commission jobs, I don't think I've ever seen a debate about their experience managing large corporate organizations or their experience in big public agencies. So I think that's one advantage. Second, it is very clear who's making the big decisions in this organization. You won't be able to hide from these things. Accountability and transparency will be a lot more evident in this. Ultimately, cultures take time to change, but as that transparency and accountability moves from the top down into the organization, because believe me, these people are going to hold the next level of management accountable, and so on and so forth. But that takes time for culture to shift. But I think the structure, as proposed and ultimately as adopted, will be a big first step towards that behavioral change of individuals and ultimately corporate culture that changes because of that.
Great, thank you. I want to thank everyone so far for all of the questions. So far this evening, we've answered 50. We've gotten and answered almost a little over 50 questions this evening. So thank you so much for your questions and for your time and for your thoughtfulness this evening. I'm going to give us I'm going to pause here for a moment because we've already answered the one question I have here is marked for live, and we already answered the other question here we have as marked for live. So I want to give us a little bit of time to wait for a couple more questions to come in. Appreciations again for everyone this evening. I'm going to put in the chat one more time where you can find the organizational chart. So if you want to ruminate and take a look at it for a bit longer, there's where the draft organization chart is. You'll also see the link there to submit public comment, anonymous public comment to the team. Again, reminding folks that public comment has been extended beyond Friday to next. Someone's going to have to, do I have the date right in my head? Next, it was a Tuesday or Wednesday, Becky?
Thursday.
I'm looking at you.
Thursday
Thursday
the 5th. Ha! Another day. Okay, Thursday the 5th at 5 p.m. You can always reach out to us at transition@portlandoregon.gov. As one of the main folks who checks that inbox, thank you to anyone who sent us an email. I appreciate it. Happy to continue to have questions and thoughts there. Again, taking all of this feedback in so that we can prepare that report for City Council. Reminding folks again that City Council will be talking or will be hearing this on October 19th at the session there, and that I'll re-put the link that was shared earlier on how folks can find the information to continue to submit testimony during that session, even beyond October, beyond the 5th. Again, you can continue to send us comments after that, and we'll continue to compile it, but would love to hear folks' feedback by the 5th to our team. Yeah, okay. Now that I have talked enough about how folks can continue to contact us, let me move back over to the Q&A here. Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. We have a question here. How will folks be able to make a case about a solution if they're not? And Tom, I'm going to ask this in two different ways. I'm going to ask this in this current, we've sort of reviewed how folks can make a case about a problem solution if they're not being heard by bureaucrats. Are they forced to go to City Council? Again, Tom, I just reviewed the ways that you can submit public comment and feedback around our engagement here. Always happy to take feedback. You can always email that at transition@portlandoregon.gov. And then you folks can go to City Council as the ultimate sort of decision maker around this work. Do I have that right? I'm just going to pause because I want to make sure that I have those details right around sort of the next steps for folks. To go after us, it goes to City Council for a decision. And is that, do I have that right in my head?
Yes, that's correct. It goes to City Council on October the 19th. But I guess I want to reiterate that we've been taking public comment and have been considering that comment for months, and we accumulated the public comment and have gone over and pulled the thematics out of the comments that the Charter Commission heard over 2 years also, and made sure that we were hearing the thematics that had come out of a lot of the public comment that even the Charter Commission heard while they were considering how to change the form of government. So I want people to know that we're taking in all of this comment. And I guess I'll say one more thing about how, and I'll just speak for myself, how I'm processing this. An org chart, an organizational structure is not just a collection of one-offs. You're really trying to think about, how does it all fit together? Can it work together? What are the where are the synapses that need to connect? What are the synergies where you can leverage information and people and investment? And what makes the most sense from some of those things we're all looking for, which is accountability and transparency, coordination and collaboration across a big organization. And so what we're attempting to do in this period between the draft and the final is we're trying to synthesize all of the comment we're getting and then see how all of that comment applies to what still needs to be something that hangs together when it goes to City Council for their consideration. Again, not just a collection of ideas, but how do all those things fit together to make a whole that can work for the city over time. So please know that everything we're getting in these kinds of venues, things that are sent to the website, comments and questions, things that we've received from employees and things that historically we've gotten from different kinds of survey mechanisms in the past. We've tried to interpret those and tried to synthesize them into a whole. And we will do that when we try to move from this draft to the final.
Nicole, if I could just jump in here, I think that one of the questions in the chat was really about not being heard by the new organization. So I think the question is, in the new organization, if somebody isn't feeling heard, what are their opportunities for contacting leadership and engaging with City Council? So Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about that difference? And then also, I think that there's also some questions about the equity officer, if you could hit on those after that.
Sure. Well, first of all, the organization is not going to run away and hide. There will still be all of the avenues that you can connect with the city that exist today. City councilors will still be very accessible, although they'll be from districts. They will all still be just as accessible as city commissioners are today. And the mayor will still be as accessible as the mayor is today. The roles may be slightly different than they are today, but accessibility wise, there will be absolutely no diminishing in accessibility. One of the ideas around Portland Solutions is that there would be a more formal organizational piece within the executive office to actually be able to process those inputs, if you will, and be able to know how can we be responsive to that input from the bureaucracy, if you will, in real time. And how can we coordinate that response in a better way than perhaps people just going and shopping through the bureaucracy? So we're attempting to create a new tool for accessibility. And I don't think any of the old mechanisms to access elected officials and I guess I will say, having been one of those city administrator types in a former life, in my former life, the elected officials held the city administrator incredibly accountable for how responsive the organization was to complaints and or issues that people brought up. And so I think and there is a direct line of accountability for those things that maybe doesn't exist as well today. And then there was a second question about equity that maybe.
Yeah, if you could just speak a little bit more to the vision of the equity officer and
Sure.
our evolving thinking around that.
Sure. Well, first of all, the equity officer is reporting directly to the city administrator because our approach to equity and anti-racism and really most of the city's values is an incredibly important thing, and it should be attached directly to the executives of the organization. But maybe more substantively, at least my expectation is that that person with probably a staff will be accountable for working with the executive leadership and then by extension with the bureaus on how to, first of all, better define what it is we are trying to accomplish in equity. I think in our current organization, we have, let's just say, multiple versions of what's important in equity. And we have a human resource that's distributed both in the Office of Equity and Human Rights, but then also, and actually more human resource that is embedded in multiple bureaus across the entire city. I would look for the equity officer to engage with both the office and with those practitioners and with the management, the executive management of the city, and really ask the hard questions about what is it we're trying to accomplish? How do we know we will get there? And then how do we appropriately allocate our human resource across a big organization to get those things done? And then obviously, how do we measure success And I'm hopeful that the equity officer is the point of accountability for that approach to what we're doing. Let me say one more thing about it. We have a council direction that is now over a decade old about equity. And I don't know that we've refreshed that conversation at the elected level for a while. And I would also look for the city administrator and the equity officer to be engaging with both council and mayor about refining what outcomes they're really looking for in the future administration, so that we can be more kind of up to date. We can be more responsive to the elected officials that are in office, and then also deploying our human resource to be effective around whatever those priorities are regarding equity and human rights.
Great, thank you, Mike. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Again, you can continue to, we talked in cool length tonight about the draft discussion guide. And so there are definitely ways for you to give us feedback and continue to give us feedback. Again, you can find, you can email us at transition@portlandoregon.gov. I put that link in the chat. You can also fill out an anonymous survey. You can find that in the chat. You can also find that at portland.gov/transition. Also want to make sure that folks know that we have a monthly newsletter where you can go ahead and sign up. I'm going to put that link in the chat as well. Want to thank everyone again for joining us this evening. Again, our feedback will be considered until October 5th, and we'll continue to compile that and continuing to compile that up to if you send us after that date, we will forward that information along to council as they consider this on October 19th. Are there any other sort of final messages to folks besides thank you for being here this evening?
I'd love to just pass it to Mike for some final thoughts about this before we wrap. Thank you, Nicole.
Well, I don't know that I have a lot new to say except thank you. This has been a huge journey for us, and the response from both inside the organization and in the community has been amazing and terrific. I think people have asked really hard and correct kinds of questions that we should be considering as we think about how the city moves forward. But I think most of all, I hope that everybody on the call, and I hope others that are out there listening to us and paying attention to what we're doing, I hope they're as excited as we are about the opportunity. You know, you only get a chance to do something like this once every 100 years or so, apparently. And we think it's a huge, exciting opportunity. And I'll just speak for myself, incredibly honored to have a part in it, because I think it is an inflection point in the history of the city. And you don't get a chance to be at this time very often. And so thank you again for being here. Keep those cards and letters coming, so to speak. And we'll look forward to the next time we can be together. Thanks, Becky.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
Good night.